Hi, I'm Richard Powell, Product Development at Aston Microphones, and I'm here today in Airtight Studios, Manchester, with Seadna McPhail, who is one of the owners here, audio engineer extraordinaire. He's too modest to tell you about some of the bands he's worked with, but if you want to check out the Airtight Studios website, there's a whole list there, some of my all-time favourite bands. So Seadna, tell us about your studios. Tell us a little bit about the experience you've had as an engineer.
Yeah, so we're here at Airtight Studios, which I've been working in for about 10 years now. I'm one of the owners now. I'm a producer and engineer based in Manchester, in Chorlton, and I've been kind of working professionally for about 20 years. We've got two nice control rooms. You'll have seen the other one on the video, but this is the room that we large control room that's more used for vocal work. We do a lot of kind of production work in here as well. And then we've got the other room, which has the larger live room where we do kind of more band related stuff. Yeah, so we've got kind of really good space that's kind of usable for all sorts of applications.
What kind of music do you do here?
We do absolutely everything. So we do a lot of the stuff can be kind of guitar bandy stuff, but we do everything from kind of voiceover. We do a lot of singer-songwritery stuff, pop stuff. Yeah, complete mixture. And then kind of more jazzy stuff, as you'll see today.
So Seadna, we came up with what we thought was a fairly interesting challenge for your studio and you as an engineer. Tell us a little bit about that.
So basically, you've asked us to record a whole band using just Aston mics, which was interesting, considering I'd not used the mics before and I'd actually not worked with the band or even met the band before. But it was a challenge I was ready for, and I kind of quite often on regular sessions like to not always stick to the same microphones each time anyway. I kind of find that can be a bit of a trap you fall into, kind of using the same mics every single time. But yes, I was kind of really eager to give it a go.
So we push you straight into the deep end. Unknown band, unknown microphones, and we wanted to see how you get on.
Yeah, and it was great. So good grief for a 4-piece jazz band who kind of play modern jazz, soul. A couple of artists who they kind of consider themselves in the same world as it would be like Yusuf Days and Tom Minch and Thundercat, that kind of stuff. So it's drums, bass, guitar, and saxophone and flute.
For this recording, did you mic up everything, or did you DI anything at all?
So we mic'd up everything. With the drums, it's not necessarily like a classic jazz setup. It's where I suppose jazz meets hip hop. It's a lot of the kind of sounds of the acoustic drum kit were not necessarily a classic drum kit sounds. They kind of borrow more from that sort of sample kind of sound where sounds might be a little deader, a little shorter. So everything's close mic'd. We've gone for quite a dead sound. Guitars, we've gone for a DI, but we've mic'd up the cab, and then bass again, we've mic'd up the cab. We did take a DI as well on that, but we've ended up using just the mics on there, and then obviously miking up the flute and the sax as well.
Drums is one of the most challenging aspects to the work of a band audio engineer. There's a myriad different ways of miking up a drum kit. What's your particular approach?
Well, I mean, my approach would change drastically depending on what the session was. In this case, the drum sound we're going for is very much kind of borrowing from the kind of hip-hop palette of sounds. So we were looking at kind of dry sounds, sometimes using saturation to kind of give it more of an additional feel that lends itself towards that sound. But everything very close mic'd. So we had on the kick drum, I think we had a stealth on the inside, which is kind of giving us that real close sound, and then a spirit on just outside the kind of resonant head of the drum, and that's kind of give us a bit of length and a bit of kind of more drum tone from it rather than that sort of immediate sample. It gives a bit of life and a bit of reality. Can also lend a bit of extra bottom end. And then on the snare, we've gone for under and over miking. I think we used stealths for both. We initially tried an Apex, but it didn't quite give the grunt that we wanted in this particular one. It sounded great, it had a lot of cut and attack to it, but I think in this case we wanted something that had a bit more kind of fullness, that we could kind of get that grunt of the drum coming through. So we ended up going for a stealth above and below, which has sounded great. Hi-hats, we went for an Origin, which is brilliant. I mean, I often use dynamic mics or ribbon mics on hi-hats because I kind of quite like the fact they're not too overly top-endy. They kind of I'm not massively into that for this. So they work great. Often I'd use a ribbon mic, and it wasn't, the top end wasn't a million miles away from the kind of smoothness that you get from more of a ribbon sound rather than that kind of the more brittle, small diaphragm condenser sound you can sometimes get.
One of the questions we get asked a lot at Aston is what is the difference between an Origin and a Spirit? They're both 1-inch large diaphragm condenser mics. And one thing we always tell people is it's the high frequencies where the main difference is. And it's really interesting that you picked up on that. Origin has a much smoother top end, where Spirit is more sparkly. They've both got the detail there, so it's not as if Origin is dull. It's just much smoother. The transients are a little bit more laid back, and it's really interesting that you picked up on that on the hi-hat. We've seen other engineers use Origin on the hi-hat as well, and in my experience of music, I find it quite interesting that somebody's using a large diaphragm condenser mic in that way. But yeah, we think it's great.
Yeah, and then so beyond that, we had a kind of interesting setup where the toms we've got, the initial groove on the song. The toms play. They're an intrinsic part of the groove. So we've got a floor tom and a rack tom, and then there's a little kind of tambourine off to one side. Tambourine, I think they're called. So it's like a very small drum, which is kind of giving us a high pitched kind of almost like a miniature snare kind of sound.
Yeah, it's a cool sound, isn't it?
Yeah. So in the end, what we've got, we really deadened off those toms to get a real kind of short, snappy sound off them. But we've kind of brought out some of the resonance. Once you get these mics, I think we used the elements on these, and once you get a kind of dynamic mic, it's a dynamic mic, isn't it?
It isn't a dynamic mic. It also isn't a condenser mic or a ribbon mic. It's actually an active moving coil. So the capsule is quite different on Element. It's 1.5 inches wide, so it's huge capsule. But it's got more of the physical properties of a dynamic mic, but it does require phantom power. But because of the size of the diaphragm, it's got great SPL handling. But because of the technology in it, it doesn't get affected by some of the problems with large diaphragm dynamics, which is you lose all the high frequencies. Element still picks up the full frequency range of music. So Element worked really well on the toms.
It worked great, yeah, really, really well.
Tell me something else about the drums. Now, there was 3 people playing in the same room, I think, on this session. Did you use a room mic at all on the drums, or does having a bass player and a guitarist in the room negate you being able to do that?
Well, we often would use a room mic, but on this, I think the brief was definitely for really close sounding drums. So we started putting one up, and I kind of very quickly decided that wasn't going to be something we were going to end up using in the mix. So we didn't in the end end up using any room on them.
And you were using a separate control room in your studio to mic up the guitar amp?
Yep.
But the bass amp, was that on and sounding in the room?
No, I think in the end what we ended up doing was DIing the bass and then reamping it, just so that we could really focus in on the sound and make sure that we're getting the sound we wanted from the amp.
So what mic did you use on the guitar amp?
So on the guitar amp, we used 2 mics. We used the Origin and we used the Stealth. I always like to do, generally speaking, when I record, 9 times out of 10, I'll do a dynamic microphone and then a second microphone that will either be a ribbon or a large diaphragm condenser, depending on what sort of sound I'm going for. On this, we wanted kind of quite a detailed top end on it, so we went for the Origin, I think, in the end, which sounded great. Yeah, so it was the combination between the 2 that really worked.
Origin has become a favourite for guitar cabs, which is interesting because we didn't design it as that. We designed it as a vocal mic predominantly, and then we saw it being used in studios, but also live a lot. So we've been really pleased to see the unintended uses of Origin. It's a very versatile little mic, we think.
It's been great. Yeah, it sounded fantastic on the cab. Andrian really liked the sound of it. He was playing guitar on the day, and yeah, so I think it's come out great.
So when you were recording the bass, I noticed you used a Stealth and a Spirit, so that's a dynamic mic and a condenser mic. Tell me why you did that.
Well, a lot of the time when I record bass cabs, I'll use a kind of large diaphragm condenser and a dynamic microphone. But to be honest, normally from a dynamic microphone, what I'm looking for is the kind of poke and the mid-range stuff. In this case, I think the Stealth's kind of a little bit more full range than the dynamics that I'd normally use for this purpose, but it still has what I needed for that job. So in the blend, I'd say in the end, the Spirit sounded really great on its own. So I might have used a bit of the Stealth, but majority of the sound in this case was coming from the Spirit.
Spirit does have a great bottom end. Miking up a flute and saxophone, any kind of wind instrument, can be quite challenging, and also the placement of the microphone can drastically alter how that instrument sounds. What approach do you take?
Well, normally with like Saxophone Flute, I kind of take a very traditional position, as in like, so on the flute, we went for a very traditional mic, which is kind of pointing at the mouthpiece, kind of just say, 6 to 12 inches away from the mouth of the musician. But I often take a second microphone that I'll just have off to one side, in this case kind of near the fingerboard, just in case we decide that we want a little bit of stereo width that reverb or anything like that might not offer us.
So you'd mix both mics together, or just choose one and predominantly use that?
I'd say probably 8 times out of 10 I'll just end up using the one mic, but there's always that odd moment where you feel that something might just feel a little bit kind of one-dimensional and mono in the middle, and it just gives you an opportunity to kind of get a little bit of spread on that without using kind of reverb or delay. With the sax, I'd almost always start off with a microphone that's kind of near the bell of the sax, and in this case we went for the Spirit, kind of because it's a really full range instrument and we wanted to make sure we kind of got all the detail that was there. Sometimes on a larger sax I might have a second mic that would be kind of near the keys or something like that, but with it being an alto, I did put a second mic kind of just off to one side, or maybe a few feet in front, I can't remember, just in case again we wanted a little bit of subtle stereo that we wanted without kind of bringing reverb or anything into the party. But it was great on its own. I think we've used pretty much just that mic.
Shayna, one of the reasons we asked you to do this video was because we wanted to incorporate what is kind of a new product for us at Aston, which is the Origins and Spirits available as matched stereo pairs. How did you use those?
So the main reason, we used, obviously for overheads on the drums was the first and kind of arguably most important thing we used them on, which they sounded really great as overheads. I was kind of actually quite surprised how good they sounded as overheads. Yes, we had those kind of over the kit, giving a kind of nice stereo image, which we kind of blended the rest of the stuff into.
And was that the Origins or the Spirits?
The Spirits, that was. And then again, we've used the Spirits for kind of percussion overdubs. As you can see in the video, we did some nice finger clicks where we got the whole band doing some finger clicks around a nice stereo pair that's just kind of give a bit of width to the side stick that's in the opening part of the song. We also did some later overdubs of some additional percussion. We did some shakers and I think a little bit of bongos. Again, we used Spirit stereo pairs on these, which did the job fantastically.
So Shayna, after the experience you had that afternoon in the studio with just Aston microphones, if we were to ask you to do that again, anything you'd do different?
I think with that band on that day, I think everything went as well as it could do, really. I don't think there is anything that I would have used differently. I think there was a couple of times where we pulled a mic out and decided to switch from one mic to a different mic. But I think the results that we got with everything that we used were great. I suppose I felt a bit uncomfortable not having the collection of mics that I can normally use and fall back on. I've normally got a plan A, a plan B and a plan C for kind of anything. So if I'm miking up a snare drum, I know that I'll use this mic, and if that one doesn't work, then this other one's a bit brighter and this other one's a bit darker. So that's a kind of comfort blanket to know that I've always got lots of plans at hand. So I was a bit concerned about having a limited number of microphones to kind of pull from. But to be honest, I didn't really have any problems. The biggest problem I might have had would have been having to add slightly more EQ on something than I would have normally had to if I'd have chosen a different mic. But that would just be the case with having fewer mics anyway. If I was using fewer mics of any type, then if you wanted something a bit darker, instead of reaching for a different mic, you'd just reach for the EQ. When you go into a situation like this where you're working with a band that you don't know and you're working with microphones that you don't know, the results are going to be unknown. As part of your job as a producer is to use a situation and microphones and equipment that allow you to know that you're going to be able to deliver a product of a certain standard. So going into a situation like this where I'm working with a band that I don't know and microphones I don't know, to be 100% sure, I probably wouldn't have done that with a paying customer straight off the back, because don't feel like I can guarantee the results. But I think, as you can hear from the track, it's come out fantastically, and we didn't have, I think all the mics worked really, 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 really well for us.
And here's the $50,000 question: which was your favourite of our mics?
Which, I don't know. I mean, the Spirit is obviously if you had to kind of pick one, it's kind of it's full band. It's kind of it sounds great. It's got great bottom end. It's got great top end. But again, I think what it's kind of proved is that most expensive is not always best for each application. For example, you might not want that full top end for something, or you might want to go for something that's slightly narrower sounding. So I don't think there is always a best microphone for each. Yeah, there isn't always a best microphone. There's just sort of whatever's the best microphone for the application.
I've seen your mic locker, and I have to say I'm very jealous. It's a collection of some absolute classics. How do the Astons compare?
No, I mean, I would just say that I think, but something that I say to people all the time, which is that I think a lot of the time people kind of consider that spending a lot of money is, spending a lot of money is, people consider is like, oh, if only I had this, then I could do that. If only I had this microphone, if only I had that, then, suddenly all my problems would be solved. But the bottom line is that the most important things are knowing how to get the most out of the equipment that you've got. You're always better off knowing how something works, how something sounds, and knowing how to get the most out of it than you are kind of knowing a little bit about lots and lots of things. I think the proof is that if you've got microphones that are good, and these Aston microphones are really good, then as long as you've got the knowledge and you've got the players and instruments that sound good, players that sound good, and that you've got a decent enough knowledge in how to record things, then you can get the results that you can get the results.
So from everyone at Aston Mics, I'd just like to say a massive thank you to Shayna for being up to the challenge that we set him, letting us come into his studio and spend the day with him. I think, we can all agree that the results that Shayna's got are fantastic, and we're really proud that Aston Mics helped him to do that.
Thank you, it's been a lot of fun.